I am used. I'm delighted and honored to be with the Steamboat Institute. Jennifer, your extraordinary staff here, every single one of them, perfect, really beautiful. To the board members, to Linda, we were talking before about my friendship with your late husband, and I must say, you know, I had the honor and the privilege to work with him, to cooperate with him, and to be blinded by his light. That's all I can say. And it is a great source of fulfillment and gratitude to know that that light continues to shine on all of us tonight, Linda. Really quite beautiful. You know this word. We're hearing a lot of it lately. Here in Denver, here in Beaver Creek, here in Chicago. People are talking about freedom all the time and the need to preserve it. But how many times, really, have people taken the time to define it? How many of us have asked that basic question, what does freedom mean to me? So let's ask, okay? Let's take a moment. What does freedom mean to you? Where's Jeff Southmaid? Where are you? Jeff! There you are. What does freedom mean to you?
You know, the right to pursue your own goals, unimpeded by government, and even negative sources from the outside, and free speech.
Free speech. He says the right to right to pursue your own wills, desires, without interference. Free speech, basic rights. That's definitely freedom. How about some of the younger people here? Where's James and Andrew, the people who introduced me from Washington Lee University? Where are you, James and Andrew? You're here. Come on. Yeah, come on, stand up. Both of you. What does freedom mean to you? These guys are great.
Choice for me.
Choice. Okay. Okay, go through life the way you want to, as long as it doesn't harm other people. But this is not a college examination. There's no right and wrong answer. These are all right answers. They're great answers. Okay, now comes the harder question. Now that we've defined freedom, we have to ask a much harder question. Is freedom worth fighting for? And then the hardest question of all, if freedom is worth fighting for, who then will fight for freedom? That was a question that would not have been answered 80 years ago, last June, when my father landed on Normandy Beach. He was barely 19 years old, one of 4 brothers serving in the military, one of whom, my Uncle Joe, landed with him on Normandy. That's my dad with a cigarette in his mouth. He ever caught me with a cigarette in his mouth, I'd get whooped. But I guess he had it coming, you know. He just fought his way across to Berlin. They advanced toward the beaches of Normandy in a landing craft known as a Higgins boat. You've seen them in the movies. And together with my father in that boat were 36 soldiers of the 168th Combat Engineer Battalion. Now, none of them had ever been in battle before. They had spent the previous 6 months in Wrexham, Wales, preparing for the invasion, consorting, as they used to say, with the locals, and recuperating from their brutal basic training in Camp Carson, Colorado. And yet here they were, thousands of miles from their homes, approaching a foreign beachhead and a desperate enemy. Ahead of them, all of them knew, lay possible, if not probable, death. And I've often wondered what it'd be like to join them in that Higgins boat. It's a fantasy. And I would ask them 2 simple questions. The first one, very simple indeed, was, where are you from? Where are you from? And the answers, no doubt, would vary in the extreme. Some would come from farms or little towns in the South and the Midwest. Others, like my dad, from tough inner-city neighborhoods. There'd be prep school graduates and spot welders, the sons of bankers and lawyers, the sons of short-order cooks and construction workers, soda jerks, and who knows, a Harvard medical student. In short, a veritable tapestry of America. My second question, by contrast, would be far more complicated. With World War II looming in front of you, literally a couple of 100 yards off the bow, what exactly will you be fighting for? And their answers, unlike their kaleidoscopic replies to my first question, would likely be uniform. We're fighting against fascism, I imagine the replying. We're fighting against tyranny and oppression and evil. We're fighting, no doubt they tell me, for everything that America stands for justice and fair play and truth. Now, I guess as there wouldn't be many atheists in that Higgins boat, and the people were there to be saying, I'm fighting for my faith. Yet, above all the reasons that those GIs would cite, one would stand out for the rest. We are fighting, they'd say, for freedom. Now imagine this. Inconceivable as it is, that same scene today. 36 soldiers in a Higgins boat about to land in hell. And imagine asking them the same two questions. And imagine their answers. Where are you from? Well, you probably still have the farm boys, and the small town kids, and a few inner city toughs. But gone, for the most part, would be the prep school grads and the lawyers and bankers' sons. Gone, most definitely, would be the Harvard medical student. And that's just the simple question. How about that far more complicated question, what are you fighting for? Now, unlike the uniform answers of 1944, those of 2024 would likely vary in the extreme. Some would fight for their country, no doubt. Some would fight for the soldiers next to them. And some because that is what they've been trained to do, to fight. Some, disconcertingly, might shrug and really not have an answer at all. But how many would say, could say, that we fight for America? We fight for the ideals of truth and democracy for which the United States stands globally. That we fight against evil and for the faith in which we believe. How many would say we fight for freedom? How many people in the Western world today would fight at all? Now, this is a strange metric. It's a thing I have, I'll admit. But it's one that I can't keep coming back to. Who today is willing to fight? Who in the Western world is willing to pick up a gun and go out and battle for her or his country and for the ideals on which it is based? Who, I ask myself, is willing today to pick up a gun and go out and fight for Belgium? Who is willing to go out and fight for the Netherlands, for Spain? And certainly there are countries, Canada, Great Britain, Australia, with citizens and armies willing to defend them. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, men and women, have taken up arms in the face of a totalitarian invader. But even in Ukraine, we've recently read, they're having acute difficulty recruiting. And in those cases where people are willing to fight for their countries, are they willing to fight for even higher ideals? Will they fight for democracy, say, or for universal rights? Will they fight for freedom? Now, I know by even raising that question, I may risk alienating, if not antagonizing, a great many people. After all, it was that idea that every Middle Eastern person yearns for American-style democracy that compelled America's invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. Back in 2003, when I was called to testify about those wars before a congressional committee, I actually opposed America's intervention in those countries, and not only because I believed that American-style democracy could not exactly take root in the Middle East. I was very skeptical. It was also because I feared that America, like Britain and France before it, would tire of the task of state-making in the Middle East, retreat from the region, and leave it in the hands of Iran and other jihadists. I questioned the long-term wisdom of those wars, but never, never for a second did I doubt the sacred American and Western task of defending freedom. For freedom is the foundation It is the essence of our civilization. And if we are to fight for freedom, we must, as I began, we have to firstly have to define it. We have to go back to that first question that I asked you. What is freedom? It is, on the one hand, Jeff, you were talking about that freedom from oppression, from ruinous taxation, from attempts by others, governments, academic institutions, the media to impose their beliefs on us. But more than freedom from, there's freedom of. Now, it's been said that while the French Revolution sought freedom from religion, the American Revolution was fought for freedom of religion. Freedom to pursue happiness, and what revolutionary firebrand Thomas Paine called, alas, politically incorrectly today, he called it a manly freedom. Ooh. Freedom of assembly, freedom of speech and dissent. Years ago, when anti-Israel protesters who violently interrupted my university lecture were arrested, they claimed that the police had violated their freedom of speech. 2 courts found otherwise. In landmark decisions, they ruled that, on the contrary, the protesters had violated my freedom of speech. The protesters, the judges concluded, had violated the audience's freedom to listen. It's another freedom. The American notion of freedom derives in part from the ancient Greeks, from the word eleutheria. Eleutheria refers to freedom from tyranny, a freedom deeply valued by the founding fathers. Eleutheria also means the ability to determine one's own destiny, literally to make decisions for yourself. But the founders not only knew their Socrates and Plato, they knew, often by heart, they knew their Bible. They say that the Inuit have many words for snow, and Bedouin nomads have many words for camel. The children of Israel in the Bible had many words for freedom: chofish, chirut, shichur, and atzmaut. You do not have to remember that. You don't even have to say it. In biblical times, kings were all powerful. But in the Bible, you'll find the first limitations on the power of kings. You'll find the notion of an independent judiciary and a system of checks and balances. Most profoundly, you'll find the totally unique belief that true freedom can only be guaranteed by law. For no sooner did the children of Israel tear off their chains in Egypt and exodus from slavery to freedom, then they gathered at the foot of Mount Sinai and they received the law. It was that notion, perhaps more than any other, that informed the authors of the Constitution of the United States. That there is no true freedom without the limits to power, without checks and balances. There is no true freedom without law. And it's no accident that the forgers of the Liberty Bell inscribed it with the words of the book of Leviticus: proclaim freedom throughout all the land, translating yet another Hebrew word for freedom, a very beautiful word, dror, dror. It's no accident that both Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin wanted the Great Seal of the United States not to be the bald eagle, but the image of Moses leading the children of Israel from bondage into freedom. There it is. Alas, they were outvoted. You got stuck with the follically challenged bird. Our biblical forefathers, like the founders, understood that freedom is a precious commodity that you can only preserve by balance. For too much law, they knew, leads to tyranny, and not enough law leads to chaos. They understood that, contrary to Janis Joplin, freedom is not just another word for nothing left to lose, but rather that the loss of freedom means the loss of everything. These distinctions were very clear during World War II and during the subsequent Cold War. We understood that there was a place called the free world. Remember that? And a world that was, by contrast, shorn of freedom. But since then, the differences has become blurred. Today, no less than during the Cold War, there is an axis against freedom, an axis spearheaded by Russia, by China, and Iran. And soldiers in these totalitarian and jihadist societies are perfectly willing to go out and fight for what they believe and die for it. Yet many in the West refuse to take this axis seriously. They no longer believe even in the concept of a free world. Many cannot even bring themselves to utter those two words, free world, much less go out and fight for them. The fact is, we are hard-pressed to find societies in the West where freedom is still cherished, still nurtured, and ferociously preserved, where freedom is more than worth fighting for. Now, one of those societies is here in the United States, where a significant share of the population still thinks of their country as the greatest nation on earth. I think some of you here think that. Other segments, though, challenge that claim. Some of the greatest beneficiaries of American freedom today, among them the most educated and affluent, no longer view their country as essential or even legitimate. On the contrary, the country is vilified as a white colonialist settler country, inherently racist, and a force for evil in the world. We in Israel, but not just in Israel, in Germany, Japan, South Korea, your allies, watch this segment with growing concern. For we know that an America that does not believe in itself and is unwilling to defend itself will be highly unlikely to help defend others. We know that a world without America in it is a very dangerous place indeed. Yet there's still one place in the free world where this debate is scarcely not taking place at all, where there's no question that the country and the values on which it stands are worth fighting for, where there is no challenging the preeminent value of freedom. That's my country, the state of Israel. Yes, the Hebrew language has many words for freedom, but that's because, ironically, tragically, the Jewish people have known so little of it throughout our history. That is why, in our national anthem, it was being played as I walked up here, Hatikva, the hope. We sing of a 2,000-year-long vision of being a free people in our ancient homeland, the land of Israel. And in Israel, there's no question about the proximity and nature of the enemy we face. Just over the border lie terrorist groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, which oppose every single freedom we cherish, above all, the freedom to life. Any doubts about the nature of these terrorists were dispelled on October 7th, when Hamas hordes poured across our border to mutilate, eviscerate, behead, burn, rape 1,200 innocent Israelis and drag more than 250 into hellish captivity in Gaza. This symbol on my lapel reminds me of their torment. And even as we gather here tonight, tens of thousands of the inhabitants of the Galilee are being pounded and uprooted by totally unprovoked rocket fire from Hezbollah. Both Hamas and Hezbollah are backed by an Iran. Iran is an empire dedicated to the eradication of freedom, dedicated to the destruction of Israel precisely because we are a bastion of freedom, and because Israel's destruction will be the gateway to the fall of all of Western civilization. For Iran and its proxies in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen all seek the same thing. They seek to recreate a medieval caliphate throughout the entire Middle East and then to expand that realm across the entire planet. That is their goal. That is their vision, but there's one tenacious obstacle standing in their way, and that is us. That is us, the state and the people of Israel. Which is why on October 7th, more than 360,000 Israelis, men and women, reported for reserve duty. Wow. Reserve units reported a response to the call-up of between 100 and 150%. People who weren't even on the roster showed up to fight, men and women. Now, imagine that you entered the Israeli equivalent of a World War II Higgins boat. Imagine that you sat in the state-of-the-art armored personnel carrier, it's called the Panther, and asked the same questions of the soldiers there that I imagine posing to my father's unit in World War II. Where are you from? And they would respond from every part of the country, from Haifa in the north to Tel Aviv in the south, to our southernmost city of Eilat. There would be immigrants from America, South America, Europe, Eastern Europe, from every part of society. Factory workers to philosophy professors, farmers to the founders of high-tech companies, religious and secular Jews, Christians, Arabs, Muslims and Druze, young people, and some, well, not so old. 2.5 weeks ago, folks. All of us together in that Panther APC, ready to meet the enemy. And then the second, more complicated question, what are you fighting for? Some would say for country, yes, for their community and even their buddies. But the majority would say, without hesitation, we are fighting for our beliefs, fighting for what is right and beneficent and true. We are fighting, the majority would say, for freedom. Proportionally speaking, 360,000 Israelis would be the equivalent of 20 million Americans. That is 4 million more Americans than fought in all of World War II. My father would have been proud of that. So too, I imagine, would my Uncle Joe and the GIs beside them in their Higgins boats. The two of them would land in France, fight with distinction at the siege of Brest, in the Battle of the Bulge, and later charge across Germany to unite with the Russians along the Czech border. During the course of their advance, they would liberate Nazi concentration camps. Uncle Joe had a camera. He took photographs. As a young kid, growing up in a working-class neighborhood, where I was often the only Jew in the neighborhood, I was always being bullied for being a Jew, my father would show me these photographs, and he'd say, "You see that, son? You see that? That's why we need a strong state of Israel." Both my father and my Uncle Joe would go on to serve in the Korean conflict as well. Between them, they won a Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars for valor, a Senate commendation, and the French Legion of Honor. We are proud of them and proud of all Americans, Israelis and others willing to stand up still and fight for freedom. We who are willing to ensure that our children and our children's children enjoy the liberties that we so often take for granted. We are proud of those who are willing to ensure that those who are now burning both the American and Israeli flags on campuses, they will not triumph. Of the campuses. We are proud of the women and men who fight to guarantee that the totalitarians and jihadists who call America the big Satan and Israel the little Satan will not gain dominion over the earth. We are proud for all those here across the United States, in the Middle East, in Africa, in Asia, who are willing to proclaim, along with those immortal words of Leviticus, "Let freedom ring." Here in Denver, in Beaver Creek, in Jerusalem, in Damascus, in Tehran, in Moscow, in Beijing too. Loudly and throughout all the lands, let freedom ring forever. You all. Hallie, thanks.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you're in for a treat. Tonight's moderated Q&A will be moderated by Tom Rogan. Yes. Everyone here knows Tom because
Tom.
he's the OG. He's the original Tony Blankley Fellow, the very first one. And he's also, yes. He's also a foreign policy analyst with the Washington Examiner. So take it away, Tom. Thank you, Dr. Oren.
Thank you very much. If everyone can hear me, thank you very much, Ambassador, for your compelling address, and thank you to all of you for the kind introduction. I apologize to Linda once again for lacking the sartorial elegance of the man that we celebrate today, but hopefully I can do you and him in heaven proud slightly by this interview. All right. The shoes are back in a closet that have been used too much, but should have been here today, and I have no excuses. So as Linda says, next year. Ambassador, we were speaking earlier, and you mentioned there might be a little anecdote involving Dallas that you...
Yeah, I mentioned a couple of people from Dallas here, right? Yeah, Dallas. So I was mentioning that on October 5th, I was giving a talk at Harlan Crow's campus. Extraordinary place, great guy. And at the end of my remarks, I mentioned, by the way, I don't want to scare anybody, but Israel's soon going to be going to war. Yep, not a prophet. This is October 5th. And I explained why. I said the Biden administration is trying to broker a peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Part of that, a big part of that arrangement is going to be a provision that will enable Saudi Arabia to enrich uranium and have its own nuclear program. And I said, if anybody thinks the Iranians are going to sit quietly and let the Saudis gain nuclear power, they're crazy. They're going to start a war. But there were some other reasons. Israel was divided at the time over a question of judicial reform. America was divided at the time. At the time, you couldn't even elect the Speaker of the House, if you remember. This is October. And then I said, rather controversially, the Iranians are looking at the political surveys in the United States, and they are afraid of the return of Donald Trump. It was Donald Trump who had eliminated the arch-terrorist Soleimani. It was Donald Trump who had pulled out of the notorious Iran nuclear deal. And they were afraid he was going to come back. And if they're going to start a war, they might as well start it before he comes back, because God knows what he's going to do if he comes back. And that didn't ruffle many feathers in Damascus, my saying that, but elsewhere it did, in Philadelphia. And 2 days later, the war broke out. Almost, no sooner had I finished saying this. So I'm not a prophet. I'm not a prophet. But I will say right now, it's just a matter of connecting dots. And right now we're talking about a hostage release negotiation, and the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, has just completed his 9th visit to the region trying to negotiate this hostage release deal. And, Israel and the United States now agree on the nature of this deal, the bridging proposals. Yahya Sinwar, the commander of Hamas, has rejected it again and again. And frankly, if I were him, I'd reject it too. Why? Because he doesn't want any hostage deal that doesn't give him what he wants. What he wants is to win. Get this. He wants to come out of his tunnel, go like this, get arms again smuggled in from Egypt, reconquer Gaza, rearm it, and launch the next October 7th, because that's what he says. I'll do it 10,000 times until Israel's destroyed. No one's going to give him that. What the United States and Israel will give him will be a temporary ceasefire. Hamas will not be able to smuggle arms across to Gaza from the Egyptian border. All these things are not going to get him. So what does Sinwar want? He wants a war. He wants a war between Israel now and Iran. And Iran's doing a great favor to him. Iran and Hezbollah is an extension of Iran, have said that if Hamas agrees to a ceasefire, we'll agree to a ceasefire. If not, we're going to attack. Guess what? Hamas is not going to agree to a ceasefire. This is just connecting dots. And a war like this is a regional war, because Hamas, was a tactical threat to the state of Israel. Hezbollah is a strategic threat to the state of Israel. Hamas at its height had about 25,000 rockets, 30,000 terrorists. Hezbollah has between 150 and 170,000 rockets. And they're longer range and more accurate than anything in Hamas's arsenal, and 100,000 terrorists who spent the last decade massacring 500,000 Syrians. They're really good at it. And if that's what they did to the Syrians, you can imagine what they're going to do to us. This is a war which is an all-out war, which will devastate the region and could bring in Russia and China. There's one way to stop it. One way to stop it. and that is the America stands up, as Ronald Reagan did in 1988, and says to the Iranians, if you dare fire a shot, we will burn you. Okay? One way. And this, it's a long-winded answer, I'm sorry, Tom, but this is very important because there's this notion that is highly regnant in Washington that to de-escalate a region, you have to de-escalate. No, no, no. If anything, the 1930s have taught us, to de-escalate, you have to escalate. You have to threaten to de-escalate. America has massive forces in the Middle East right now. 2 naval aircraft carrier forces, a nuclear submarine, squads of F-22 Raptor fighters. All you have to do is say to the Iranians, don't you dare, and it'll all stop. It'll all stop. But to do that, you have to, be like a Ronald Reagan. In 1988, the Iranians kept on firing on Kuwaiti tankers. Reagan said, you dare to do it again, we're going to burn you. And they did, and he did. He ignited half of their oil refineries and sunk half their navy. And guess what? They got real quiet after that. Real quiet. It's the way the world works. Anyway, thank you, Tom.
So I might actually then jump to a different question here based on, you mentioned Ronald Reagan. One of the challenges, perhaps, for the United States in the Middle East at the moment is a lack of credibility. Going back to the Iran nuclear deal, where the Saudis and the Emiratis were just as opposed to it as Israel was. Maybe slightly less, but significantly opposed to. Oh. Ronald Reagan, for all his fantastic accomplishments, also was the president who, in a sense, inspired al-Qaeda by the withdrawal from Lebanon after the Marine barracks bombing. If you were in the Oval Office on January 20, 2025, whoever the president was, and that president said to you, how can America rebuild credibility in the Middle East? What would you say?
Stand up, be strong, and fight. We made peace. I was privileged to be involved in the process leading to the Abraham Accords, our peace agreement with 4 Arab countries. And, and I was also ambassador during the period of President Barack Obama. And I would always say this quite honestly and openly. Obama aspired to bring Arabs and Jews together through peace. And he succeeded in bringing us together, just not through peace. He succeeded in bringing us together through common opposition to his policies. America was pulling out. America was cutting a deal with Iran. These countries, these Arab countries, are facing twin existential threats. Sunni extremism in the form of the Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, okay? You can take a number. And Shiite extremism in the form of Iran and Hezbollah. There's only now one country in the Middle East that's staying there and fighting both of them. And by the way, if we win, we'll get more peace. You understand? No one's broken off relations with us. I just flew yesterday from Colombia, trying to maintain some kind of relationship with Colombia, our closest ally in South America. They've now cut off, the horrible president there, Petro, has cut off relations with us. He's cut off even the supply of coal to Israel. We import Colombian coal. None of these Arab countries have cut off relations with us. Have you noticed this? None of them, because they know. They know we're there to defend them as well. And we're fighting their existential enemies. So my recommendation to the president on January 2025 will be, you want to have influence not just in the Middle East, but around the world. Stand up and defend your allies. Defend your allies all the time. Instead of accusing us, over and over again of quote-unquote killing too many Palestinians, which is a very strange locution, because it suggests that there's some number of Palestinian dead that would have been okay. All right, 5 is too many, 3 is okay? I don't quite always get that. Or that we're dehumanizing or doing this. Always stand by us all the time. Stand by your allies. And guess what? People are going to respect you in the world. People will make peace because they respect you. And not just that. When you stand by your allies, the Russians take notes. The Chinese take notes. Because it's not just the Middle East. You can't confine this to the Middle East. It's a global stage. And we know today that the way America withdrew from Afghanistan, that Mr. Putin was taking notes. It's very clear. No one even doubts that today. It's not a political statement. And so we have to be cognizant. So you want to be safer here, You be safer here by living up to America's historic role, which is to defend freedom around the world. America was safe. And this is not an easy argument today, because there's a lot of isolationism in this country. But you have to understand this. You're not doing this just for the sake. It is not philanthropy. It's not altruism. It is self-interest as well. And that my father's generation, I think the generation of many of your fathers here, understood that. They understood that in the Higgins boat. That by bringing freedom from tyranny, from Nazism, from oppression, that it would redound in the United States as well. And that period from World War II, maybe through the 60s, will always be remembered as one of the most affluent and secure times in the history of this country because of what they did. They had it right. And you have to regain that knowledge, that notion, that fighting for freedom is not just a do-good thing. It is doing good, but it's not just a do-good thing. It is what makes America secure, strong, and prosperous.
Ambassador, you mentioned China there. One of the things that when I talk to people who are otherwise very pro-Israel in the national security community, a regular critique is that Israel has become, especially under Prime Minister Netanyahu, far too close to China. And I've heard multiple national security people tell me the technology that China has been able to access through cooperation with Israel will kill Americans in the next war.
Oof.
That's been said to me, and I think
I have sat through meetings with 3 administrations now where I've heard not dissimilar things.
Okay.
Not
So
dissimilar.
what do you think, because of China's pretty blatant, via TikTok, openly diplomatic track, abandonment, betrayal of Israel, you might say, since October 7th, where they essentially have endorsed Hamas, there would be, do you see the prospect of a fundamental change in that Israeli-China relationship in a way that would be favorable to the United States?
They damn well better be. Let's explain the background to it. China's not a friendly country. It wasn't an enemy country. It was a frenemy country. A frenemy country that didn't vote with us in the UN, certainly. Yes, it backed Hamas, backed Hezbollah, has signed a 25-year, $400 billion treaty with Iran, which has a military component in it, which has built the largest base leading into the Red Sea in Djibouti. The largest military base in our region is a Chinese base. They're scheduled to build 2 more bases on the Persian Gulf. China has come to the Middle East in a very big way. But it's come in a different way, not just in a strategic way, it's come in an economic way. And our population has grown, exponentially. We have the highest natural growth rate in the industrialized world. I mean it. You go to the parks in Tel Aviv on the Sabbath, on Shabbat, and there's kids falling out of the trees. You gotta walk around with an umbrella, okay? And people have kids in Israel. And we've grown so much that we are short about 50,000, 60,000 apartments every year. We have to expand our ports because we import about 90% of our food. Who does this quickly and cheaply? The Chinese. And if you get up in my neighborhood in South Tel Aviv in the morning, at 6 o'clock in the morning, I get up because I'm a rower, and it looks like Shanghai. Everyone's on bicycles and yellow helmets. And we have to revisit this. We have to revisit this. And there were some terrible mistakes made, particularly by the Technion, our MIT, in signing agreements with Chinese universities because they simply got a lot of technology for free. We have to wake up. We have to revisit our relationship with China. We have to find alternative means of building cheaply and quickly, because we have to build cheaply and quickly. There must be other people in the world who can build cheaply and quickly without stealing our secrets and not undermining our relationship with our ultimate ally, which is the United States.
On a similar note of controversy, some of the critics, admittedly neglecting the fact that Hamas views schools as arsenals and hospitals as bunkers, would suggest that certainly in the early stages of the Israeli response to the October 7 atrocities, there was an over-reliance on air power versus ground combat operations, and that caused unnecessarily high civilian casualties. How would you respond to that?
It's not true. Actually, most of the civilian casualties came later. After the initial air campaign was about 2.5 weeks. And what happened was the Israeli army simply wasn't ready. Remember, we called up 360,000 reserves. They had to be trained. They can't just call up a reserve and send them into battle. So it takes 2 to 3 weeks to train a reservist, to go through all the maneuvers, all the guns, all this, all the commands. So they did that. They brought them all to the border. They trained them. During that time, the idea was to keep Hamas's head down. We were being pummeled every day by rockets. Where we live in Jaffa, it's the rocket. It's Rocket Alley. Every rocket that was aimed at Tel Aviv came over our house. I can show you some of the pictures. And like many Israeli houses, we have a bomb shelter. And we had to keep running to that bomb shelter several times a day and several times a night. We have a cat. We have an ADHD cat who for some reason internalized and always beat us into the shelter. He was like, boom, right up the stairs. So the air power was just try to damp this down. As for the casualty level, let's talk about casualties for a second, shall we? This is a very important point. I've had the great honor of getting to know John Spencer. He's the professor of urban warfare at West Point. He's a lieutenant colonel, a combat veteran, terrific young man, who says that never in history has any army encountered remotely the challenges that the Israeli army has faced in Gaza. Okay? Even in Mosul and Fallujah, in Mosul, the U.S. military, the Marines, faced 5,000 fighters in an area that had been cleaned out of civilians and had very few tunnels. We're facing 30,000 who are not only fighting us on the surface, they're fighting us below the surface because Hamas has built 400 kilometers of tunnels. That's the size of the New York subway system, folks. Inconceivable. Inconceivable. We don't even have enough explosives to blow it all up. And on top of that, they have 250 hostages down there at the beginning. About 60 are alive now. It would have been the easiest thing in the world in the first day for the Israeli army to go in there, fill up all the tunnels with gasoline, and then throw in a match. We couldn't do that because of the hostages. We couldn't do that. And so we're dealing with an enemy that cares nothing about its own civilian population. They say that. They're there to die. Yes, they use schools. Yes, they use mosques. Yes, they use hospitals. It's amazing that people still criticize us for battling in a hospital. They're using the hospitals. And if you have a situation where, the other day I was on Wolf Blitzer. I do CNN pretty much every week. And the item is saying every fact that was cited by the IDF or by the Israeli government had a rider with it. CNN cannot confirm this. The Israelis claim this, but CNN cannot confirm this. And it went on and on and on. Every allegation made by Hamas did not have the rider. Hamas says. So the Gazan Health Ministry, which is Hamas, which to health, is like cigarettes to lungs, really, all right, says that the number of deaths, fatalities, have gone over 40,000. By the way, it goes up 1,000 every couple of days. All right? And if you go to a great University of Pennsylvania scholar named Abraham Weiner, has proven statistically that Hamas's fatality statistics are statistically impossible. They're literally, he does it on a board, he'll show you. But nobody in the media says this. And in fact, unfortunately, the President of the United States says over and over again, quoting this number. Okay, let's just say, for argument's sake, that there have been 40,000 Palestinian fatalities in Gaza. The Israeli army has killed 17,000 terrorists at least. We know because we have to take their pictures. We have to take their photographs to make sure that they're not hostages. Okay? We found 10 bodies the other day, 6 were hostages, the other 4 were terrorists. We had to take their pictures. 17,000, deduct that from the 40. Now, also not counted in the 40 are the thousands of Palestinians who are killed by Palestinian rockets that fire short. The other day, 2 rockets were fired at Tel Aviv. One hit the ocean, the other fell in Gaza. Guess what? When they fall in Gaza, they kill people. You all remember the Al-Ahli hospital incident back in late October, where Hamas said we killed 500 people with a bomb, an aerial bomb, in a hospital. Turned out it wasn't a hospital, it was a parking lot. It wasn't 500, it was 50, which is a tragedy in itself. But it was a Palestinian rocket that fell short. 12% of the rockets fall short. Deduct a couple of thousand there, but also deduct the 5,000 people who, out of a population of 2.5 million, over the course of 10.5 months, die of natural causes. And you put all of that together, and you'll have a combatant to civilian fatality rate of 1 to 1. When the United States fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, it was between 4 and 9 to 1. No army in history has ever reached 1-to-1. None. And this is done through a great expenditure of resources and, frankly, blood of Israeli soldiers. Because the easiest thing to have done, and I'm not sure this country wouldn't have done this, Tom. We got a lot of tanks. We got a lot of artillery. We got a lot of things that go boom in the night. On October 7th, we could have lined them all up along the border of Gaza and said, guys, you got 10 minutes, open fire. And believe me, it would have ended. It wouldn't have been where we are today. We'd go in and get the hostages. But we're not like that. We are not like that. And frankly, if that order had been given, nobody would have carried it out. We're not like that. And so we are being vilified and branded a genocidal army after being attacked by an openly, avowedly genocidal enemy that tried to commit an actual genocide. And think about what that does, how that makes our soldiers feel out there fighting in that way.
Talking of casualties, your intelligence services, one in particular, have obviously done a pretty exquisite job in terms of some of their more recent operations in Iran. But Iran, based on what we're hearing from Director of National Intelligence, Mike Rogers, Chair of the House Intelligence Committee, may soon be moving towards nuclear weaponization on a very short breakout window. When my professor at King's College London War Studies Department, Israeli professor, I asked him, what is Israel's nuclear security strategy? He said, you want to understand that? Go to Auschwitz. It's the second Holocaust precursor in a way that Hamas potentially could not be. Two questions on that regard. First, could Israel by itself take out the Iranian nuclear program? And secondly, what would be the red line, whether it's Prime Minister Netanyahu or Gantz or someone else, what would be the red line to take action to prevent that threat?
Well, I got to be very frank with you. We didn't succeed. We set out to prevent Iran from acquiring what's known as threshold nuclear capacity. That's the ability to make a nuclear bomb in a very short period of time, weeks or perhaps days. Today, Iran has reached that nuclear capacity, threshold capacity. It is a decision away from being a military nuclear power. It has a delivery system. It's the same rockets they use to put their satellites in space. The big question is, where are they in terms of the warhead? And we know those same wonderful agents raided a Iranian archive in Tehran in 2018, and we know that they're working on a warhead. They have it disguised and broken up in various universities. It could be very well close to completed. Now, there's a debate in Iran whether having the nuclear threshold capacity, whether to have the ability to make a bomb quick, is better than actually having a bomb. Because if you have a bomb, someone's liable to bomb you in return. Whereas having the ability to make a bomb gives you all the benefits of a bomb without actually possessing one. Why? The world knows. That's why Iran has been admitted to the BRIC Association. That's why Iran has forged these close alliances with China, with Russia, with North Korea, because they know it's basically a nuclear power. And it already makes a check on our decision making, because if we have to go to war against Hezbollah, and a war against Hezbollah is not like a war in Gaza, we have to move our entire army into southern Lebanon. 200 Lebanese villages in southern Lebanon are the camouflage for those 170,000 rockets. We have to move in them quickly. We have to think, if we do this, will Iran break out and create a nuclear weapon? It's a serious consideration. Now, we have always had a disagreement with the United States on this, and not just with democratic administrations. And it's this. The United States has pledged over and over again to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Okay? This current administration has not put a military option on the table. Strange enough, Barack Obama did, but Biden did not. He will not say there's a military option. He'll say all options are on the table, but not a military option. It's interesting. The difference with us is the United States has never pledged to prevent Iran from having the ability to make a nuclear weapon. They have the ability to get that to that threshold capacity. For us, it's much more dangerous. It's much more dangerous. Now, does Israel have the capacity to stop them? Without going into too much detail, Israel has capabilities. It has capabilities that, and I would say conventional, I would stress conventional capabilities we have. We haven't even used them on the battlefield yet. We may have to use them in Lebanon. We got rockets too. And we have an Air Force. And we can reach them. Listen, we just blew up a Yemeni port that's 2,000 kilometers away. And that's the distance between Israel and a lot of these nuclear facilities. So there, it's actually a little shorter. So there's a little message there to Iran. The question is, will the United States join that? Will the United States live up to its pledge to know how much heads up time you're going to have? There's an assumption that they're going to have a month or two of heads up to know when Iran has broken out and created a nuclear weapon. I hope that's true, and I hope someone acts on it. Because the minute Iran gets a nuclear weapon, we are in a different world, folks. Not just in the Middle East. We're in a different world globally. And it will affect every single one of you here, because terrorists will be able to act in this country. And Hezbollah and Iran have major presence in this country and in South America, where I've just come from. They will be acting under a nuclear umbrella. And it'll be a completely different ballgame. So I'll leave you with that cheery thought.
So what probability, putting you on the spot,
probably.
would you say the Israeli Prime Minister, that month, that starts, right? That month-long clock starts. Within that month, that Israel, with the United States or other allies, or by itself, takes military action.
At the end of the day, this is why the State of Israel came into existence. All right? The State of Israel comes into existence on May 14th, 1948, which is almost 3 years to the date after the end of the Holocaust, May 8th, 1945. And, like this country, we came into existence on the basis of a social contract, right? Which is in our Declaration of Independence. And our Declaration of Independence looks and sounds exactly like the American Declaration of Independence because it was written by Americans. But quite uniquely, Israel also comes into being on the basis of a covenant, almost a biblical covenant, which is what happened back there in the Holocaust is not going to happen again. It's what my father was telling me when he showed me those pictures. By the way, I carry all those pictures on my cell phone. There are a lot of them. You don't want to see them all. And on October 7th, we didn't live up to that promise very well. But that promise is what we're about. It's our essence. And for Israel to do nothing while Iran acquires a nuclear weapon, about which a former Iranian president once said, no problem, Israel is a one-bomb country. And we are. And whatever second strike capabilities we have, what good are they going to do? If we're all dead, then we have not lived up to the essence. We haven't lived up for the raison d'etre, why we came into being, to defend the land and the people of Israel. And we will have to do that.
One final question, then I'll get some audience questions. Tony Blankley wrote in an article in 2004 in regards to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the peace process, that the Palestinians are paying a high price for their revanchist fantasy that Israel can be made to go away. If you look at the Barak Plan in 2000, Olmert 2008, the tradition here, I think even maybe center-left observers, is that the Palestinians like to say they're going to get a deal, but don't. On the flip side, in the long term, there probably isn't a solution to this conflict without a two-state solution. What is the way, if there is a way, when the dust settles, to get there? And maybe there isn't, and tell me if there isn't.
Where's Todd? Todd? I think it was Todd. We were having this conversation before about solutions. I think it was Todd. No? Rod. There you are. What did I tell you? No solution. Thank you. Want to answer the question?
Okay. So,
listen, I know, Americans really want solutions. I'm sorry. There are no solutions to many things in the Middle East. There's no solution to Syria. There's no solution to Iraq. There's no solutions. There's better management. I have been involved in the peace process since its inception. There's an inception. Obsession was a good Freudian slip. Inceptions. I was an advisor to Yitzhak Rabin back in 1993 at the outset of the Oslo process. I've been involved. I took part in the last round of negotiations with the Palestinians as I was advisor to the Trump peace plan, by the way, which is the best peace plan anybody's ever seen. Unfortunately, Palestinians rejected it, of course. And I have two perspectives. I have the perspective of being in that process, and I'm an historian. And as an historian, I will tell you that the Palestinians have the world's record for being offered a two-state solution and rejecting it. And rejecting it usually with violence. 1937, 1947, 2000, 2001, 2008. They rejected it. Somebody in the West is not getting the memo. They don't want it. Okay, they're telling us over and over again they don't want it, but no one wants to listen. They keep on saying two-state solution, two-state solution. which is an oxymoron. Because no one's asking what this state's going to look like. No one's asking, who's going to run this state. It's going to be a democracy. It's going to be an Islamic republic. Really, is it going to be militarized? No one's asking these questions. It's amazing. And I live in southern Tel Aviv. Out of my rear window, I see the hills of Hebron in the West Bank. If they create a Palestinian state there that's going to turn into a Hamas state in 2 days, I'm not going to be in rocket range. I'm going to be in rifle range. They can put a rifle bullet through my back window. Now, if you ask Israelis, and I think my own family is probably left of center on Israeli issues, you ask them, should we create a Palestinian state? They look at you, what are you, crazy? Are you nuts? All these people are running around talking about two-state solution, as if it's the only solution. The tragedy of it is that by focusing on a quote-unquote solution, which is totally unattainable, and if it were attainable, it will bring down half the Middle East, okay? That you rule out other ways of proceeding. And this is what I was talking about, Rod, about good management. You could create a federal solution, right? America knows about those, right? Where you have a state of Nablus, a state of Hebron, an Israeli state, and we have a federal relationship. You can have a cantonment. Who are the Swiss people here? There's two lovely Swiss people here, all right? There you are. Who's the Swiss? Someone from Switzerland was telling me before. Yeah, there you are. Hello, Switzerland. Cantonments. I love it. The Swiss have a good idea. We could take the Swiss model and apply it to the Middle East. There are ways of proceeding. But if you're going to keep beating your head against the wall, Einstein's definition of insanity, you keep beating against something that has no chance whatsoever of succeeding because the Palestinians don't want it and the Israelis don't want it. Other than that, it's fine, right? You've ruled out other creative ways of moving forward. And that is the true tragedy because the people who are espousing this idea of a two-state solution are not doing it for the Palestinians. They're doing it for themselves. Because they actually cared about the Palestinians, they'd stop. They'd stop, but they won't. And it is a tragedy.
Question here from the audience. How and why did the Israeli intelligence services fail to anticipate October 7th?
We don't know yet.
Okay.
I was in government. Listen, I was the deputy in the Prime Minister's office. One day in 2017, the Prime Minister called me in and said, I got some really bad news for you. You're going to be in charge of Gaza. And I spent the half year studying Gaza. What I learned about Gaza, you don't want to learn. You just don't. This is a Hamas that cares nothing for its own population. I mean, the population could be starving. They spent $1 billion on tunnels. They took all that international aid and put it into tunnels, into arms. And think about this. They used children to dig those tunnels. Hundreds died every year because Gaza's made of sand. It collapsed. We were willing to bring in 1,200 huge truckloads of food, aid, everything. You talk about this blockade. The blockade is malarkey, okay? Blockade was about arms, not about food, not about cement, not even about toys. Hamas would only let 400 trucks in because it wanted to keep the population hungry and angry and dependent on Hamas. You had to throw out everything you know about human decency when it came to Iraq, to Gaza. You had to throw it out the window. Within the Israeli government and in the military, and by the way, in successive American administrations, Republican and Democratic alike, there was an assumption. The assumption was that Hamas wears two hats. It wears a jihadist hat and it wears a governance hat. And if you paid Hamas enough money from the Qataris, Hamas would wear the governance hat and put the jihadist hat beside, alone. And so we let in 20,000 workers from Gaza. We said, give Hamas something to lose, all these good salaries. We forgot. We forgot what Hamas was. We thought, we fell prisoner to our beliefs of freedom and human dignity and decency. We forgot what Hamas is. Hamas is barbaric. It is barbaric, even the way the Nazis weren't even barbaric. It's hard to imagine. The Nazis never filmed anything of the Holocaust. You never see pictures of Jews being led into gas chambers. These guys wore little cameras and broadcast their horrors around the Middle East, recording it for posterity. You can't imagine. Okay. And we never anticipated that type of barbarism. And what we fell victim at the end of the day. Incompetence, over-reliance on technology. There's many things that are going to come out. But the basic fault was we are a Western society. and we believe in fundamental human decency. And we forgot with whom we were dealing. And now we know, and I hope to God we never make that mistake again.
So I think we've got time for maybe one more question here, and I'm slightly reticent to ask this, but seeing as it's an election year and one of the major candidates did say it, do you agree with former President Donald Trump that Jews who support Democrats need to get their heads checked? And if you want to extend, if you want to extend on the end of that,
Right.
with how do you see U.S.-Israeli relations playing out if Kamala Harris wins and if Donald Trump returns to the White House?
We have to assume that a Harris administration would not depart significantly from the Obama and Biden, which is to try to reconcile with Iran and not confront Iran, to try to work for a two-state solution with all that is involved, oppose Israeli settlements. We now have a precedent under Biden of the United States sanctioning Israeli citizens whose politics they don't like. It's a very slippery slope, and I've opposed it strenuously, even though if I don't agree with the people who are being sanctioned at all. Very slippery slope. To base myself on the previous Trump administration, which was willing to confront, though not always. Donald Trump also picked up and withdrew from Syria, which had some very deleterious ramifications. You don't want to retreat in that way from the Middle East. That would be the big difference. We're going to have to, I don't, right now, including I know a lot of her foreign policy people, I work with them, they're the same people, would not see a major departure from long-standing Democratic Party foreign policy. And, whether we're going to deal with it or not deal with it, we'll see.
Ambassador, thank you very much for your address and the questions and answers. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
That's it. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody. I should just conclude with this. Bravo. Can I? One last word, just really one last word, because these are really dark times. Okay, they're dark times, and I was talking to some people on the staff before with Hallie and Kelly, and my phone was buzzing. My phone buzzes whenever a rocket falls in northern Israel. The alerts go off. You saw me up there with in a different type of uniform. I was up in the north 2.5 weeks ago. Constant rocket fire. Very dark. Soldiers killed in Gaza. Anti-Semitism sweeping across the world. Isolation, condemnation. It is very difficult to be optimistic today. I am optimistic. I'm optimistic for many reasons. I'm a man of faith. That's very important. Okay, I believe. But it's more than that. I have a historical perspective, and I have a personal perspective. I moved to Israel, 50 years ago. When the country was the Wild West, it had nothing. Really. We had no relations with India, China, Africa, nothing. No peace with Egypt, no peace with Jordan, nothing. The food was terrible. The falafel was bad. Nothing. Our major export item was orange juice. I'm not kidding you. All right? And you scoot ahead 50 years. Oh, my. A technological powerhouse, an army that's more than twice as large as the British and French armies combined. 3 of our 7 universities just made it into the top 100 universities in the world. When I was a kid, there were 3 million Jews who were prisoners behind the Iron Curtain. Today, they're all free. Whereas Elia, he knows to talk about that, right? And, I've just seen it in my own lifetime. I've seen miracles. And anybody who's had what I've seen what I've seen, cannot help but be optimistic. But I'm also that historian. On May 14th, 1948, this country came into being with nothing, no allies, no resources, about to be invaded by 5 Arab armies. And we won, under odds that are significantly greater than the odds we're facing right now. Significantly greater. And we created this country. And a country, by the way, which is one of the few countries in the world, along with the United States, Britain, Canada, New Zealand, that has never known a second of non-democratic governance. Think about that. You can't say that about Europe. You can't say about South America, Africa. Never known a second of non-democratic governance, and we were the only country on that list that's never known a second of peace. That's our greatest accomplishment in so many ways. You cannot help being very, very optimistic. We are one resilient people. Just what? We're coming back. Thank you all.